Uncommon Visions. I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg, and I'm super excited to have my friend and former colleague, Francisco Pepin, on my show today. Welcome, Francisco.
Hey, nice to see you, Dr. Valerie.
Thanks. Francisco was born in the Caribbean and raised in San Francisco in the Mission District in a single-parent household and grew up as a non-native speaker. As a first generation in his family to attend college, he went to Briarcliff College in Sioux City, Iowa, where he ultimately chose English as a major and education as his profession. In 2001, he went back to San Francisco State University, where he earned a master's in educational administration. He has dedicated 14 years of his life to the classroom and teaching English, and 17 years to school administration. His experiences include very rural and very large urban districts with varied demographics, including the most culturally diverse schools in the San Francisco Peninsula, and another community infamously identified as one of the top 10 worst communities for African Americans, which is Waterloo, Iowa. Francisco, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, it's great to see you, and it's great to be here. So, yeah, let's have this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So, I gave a little bit about your background, but can you talk more specifically about why education, and then from there, why school leadership?
Education, I think I would be remiss if I don't explain it, how it ended up taking me into a teaching setting, and that is, like you mentioned, I was raised in San Francisco. I did my K through City College of San Francisco work there. And I entered City College as a history major because I just enjoyed history. And so they have that marking, what's your major? I thought, okay, history. I enjoyed it, but I ended up leaving college at that time and for about a year. And then got hooked up with a coach that was in the Caribbean, in Puerto Rico, for the Pan American team. And he found out I had some eligibility left.
Right. I was about to say, can you specify which sport?
Yeah, I was a decent basketball player in the Bay Area. And then I ended up getting a scholarship, an athletic scholarship to Briarcliff College, like you mentioned. When I landed there, I actually landed there, as a basketball player. Going to college, but I didn't know what major. And the papers were pretty much signed for me. I remember signing the scholarship paper. The major was, someone had picked it for me, and it was business, which I didn't. Yeah, I didn't disagree. It sounds good. And maybe I should have stayed in that. But I was in an accounting class, and it just didn't grab me. The teacher was awesome. The professor was awesome. I had him the second time in an accounting 2 class. And it just didn't grab me. So I picked mass communications. And to this day, I have a minor in mass communications. And I ended up leaving that program or department because I had a world literature class that was taught by a professor that really allowed the literature itself to stand out. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, there were professors that did a lot with their body language and their inflection and intonation and et cetera, et cetera. And this professor, and I remember him reading just with one eye. I bumped into him since then, and I think they took care of that surgically when it was ready. But he read from the books, and he had one eye reading it closely, and he went word by word, line by line, and really didn't add much to it, like some other professors that were, had a lot of flair and energy.
What do you mean
so
by
it had to be something?
So he just read it?
Right. He read it. Now, he had enough, obviously, but it was in his just pure reading of it. There was no theatrical thing. He wasn't pacing back and forth or throwing his hands up. And then, of course, it was world literature. I mean, Japanese no drama, Chinese theater, African drama, Caribbean folk tales. I mean, all over. right? And so um, that really grabbed me. And after taking that class, I went in to see that professor who was my advisor. So I also knew him uh,
Mm-hmm.
barely, just for scheduling.
Right.
But after I got to know him more, and I declared an English major, and he was happy about that,
Mm-hmm.
and I was happy about that, and I moved on, right? But uh, like a lot of people, right? Psychology majors, English majors, film majors. I mean, there's dozens of them. I imagine.
Underwater basket weaving was what I used to grow up saying.
Yeah, what do you do with that, right? Other than enjoy underwater basket weaving, right? So I was in a vocabulary class, a one credit vocabulary class in a trimester schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a student of Dr. Leo Frummelt, who at the time I did not know was the department chair of education.
Mm-hmm.
And I was from the Mission District in San Francisco. So I didn't, I wasn't sure about certain classes. So I sat right next to the door, the very first chair,
Mm-hmm.
so I could leave quickly if I needed to.
Okay.
And to my left was this poster, and it said, better to remain silent and remain a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt.
About
Right.
right.
And I'll never forget that poster, and I'll never forget Dr. Leo Frummel teaching vocabulary through etymology, right, which was beautiful. And I had this natural love of words that I began to discover. And
Mm-hmm.
so at that point, that conflicted with something I was taught as a junior that said, speak today what you know in hard words, and tomorrow, even if it conflicts against what you say tomorrow, which
Mm-hmm.
was a transcendental kind of belief, right? And so I'm just learning along the way. And some of these things are catching my eye and forcing my brain to really think about what's going on. I really got to know this guy, Dr. Leo Frummelt, and then he invited me to his office to talk about things. He came to every game. He watched me. He read newspaper articles on me and called me in and complimented or asked me to do something better. He started taking me out to lunch. He knew a little bit about me and some of the things
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned in the introduction, right? But
Looks like he invested some time into you.
important time.
Right.
Having lunch with somebody and then a couple of dinners and being in an environment that's really the Green Gable was a place in Sioux City at the time where the elderly went to eat lunch, and he took me there, and I'm sure I was along, other than some staff, I was probably the youngest person in there eating, and I clearly remember looking around and going, huh, this is an interesting place, right?
Can I
um,
ask you a
now,
side question, right, really
yeah,
quick?
yeah,
Because it occurs to
yeah.
me, when I was that age or around that age, I was always very nervous to go out to eat with people because I knew I didn't know. Like I
Yeah.
knew that I didn't know anything about etiquette. I knew that I didn't know the place of plates and forks and all of those things. Do you think that part of having that experience also kind of, I don't want to say acculturated, but kind of gave you a different view of yourself and what you could become because you had that person to come alongside you and give you that experience?
I think those experiences play a huge role,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I was good enough in the seventh grade to make a Bay Area All-Star team and got to fly to Disneyland and play in a tournament, the
Mm-hmm.
Golden State boys basketball tournament, as a seventh grader, and stay in a hotel and visit Disneyland and play in basketball tournaments. This was way before AAU and any of this club ball.
Right,
Um, that was a teaching, right? That was a learning.
right,
I had a friend whose family made it in the Mission District. The dad was a contractor, and they bidded on the right things, and they moved out of the Mission to a corner home in San Francisco, and they bought a cabin in Clear Lake. Now he grew up like I grew up in the Mission District
right,
between 24th and Army Street, which is now Cesar Chavez, and by Ralph Park and Harrison Park, where the projects were, and we lived directly across the street from them. And they made it. So I got to see what a cabin was by a lake and what it's like to stay a weekend. Those things are important. So when you mentioned Dr. Leo Frummel taking me out to lunch and having that experience, yeah, does that help you understand that there are more things in life than the things that are happening around your neighborhood or around your blocks or in your world when you're a sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th grader?
Right.
Absolutely critical, right? But
Right.
what this man did was amazing because he had me tell him stories and what I did. And I had been playing pro ball in Puerto Rico at the time, and I relayed to him that I was working a clinic for Seven Up because somehow we got into a conversation about what I enjoyed most when I was in Puerto Rico and playing basketball. I said, well, other than basketball, and so I said we went around the projects uh, and we set up the stand and we had a bunch of basketballs, and then all these kids came pouring out of the projects in Puerto Rico, caseríos they're called in Puerto Rico, and we
Mm-hmm.
would have 4 or 5 of us BSN, Baloncesto Superior Nacional, the BSN league. There's the high level league in Latin America, and we're performing for these kids and we're giving them a clinic and then free drinks and some free gifts and giving up a basketball. And he goes, "What did you enjoy about that?" And I said, "Well, they really enjoyed us." "Well, what was it that they enjoyed?" "Well, what was it that you enjoyed?" And I said, "Well, I mean, they really admired us, and well, what was it about it that you enjoyed?" And I said, "Well, the look in their eyes. They had this. They loved you. They admired you. They had this like feed me, right? Look." And
Right.
he said, "But no, really, what was it that you enjoyed about doing those things?" And I said, they really loved this. Their eyes showed it on." He goes, "No, what did you love about it?" And eventually, he got me to say that I felt like I knew enough about basketball to teach it to others. And he looked right at me and said, "Don't you feel you know enough about English to teach that to folks?" And that was the line of the decades for me,
Right.
because that allowed me to see that with an English major, I could become a teacher and enjoy that career as much as I enjoyed going to the projects teaching basketball, because I was knowledgeable about
Right.
English thanks to years in college, right? So that's how I chose education, and then all of a sudden I was in his department, right? So I ended up as a teacher.
Okay. Awesome. That's a
Yeah,
what I love about that story is it demonstrates that the path is not linear. It's not just a straight line, but that you have these different experiences along the way. And all of those end up being part of the story as to who you are and how you show up. So I think that's really awesome.
absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna kind of shift gears a little bit and ask a little bit more complicated question. So what you're saying to well, part of what I think I'm hearing in your story is this notion of first access and opportunity. That's huge. Then mentorship. That is super huge. Having someone that you trust who gets to know you on an individual basis, who just helps you figure out who you are and what you're about. And then understanding that passion, that service component of I want to be able to make a difference in someone else's life through this thing that I know how to do, through this passion that I have, to see those lights come on and see that not just admiration, because it's I mean that's a little bit more self-centered than I want to sound, but
Mhm.
more of that light bulb of that connection, and that skill connection. So, how do you, with that background, with that impetus, take that into your leadership to make a difference for teachers who are then directly touching the lives of those students?
Well, it took a lot of training
Mm-hmm.
besides where we got to where I became a teacher of English. Certainly, I'm taking all those things with me, and I'll
Right.
bring them forward again. But you have to be good at what you're doing to then become an administrator that is looked up to or respected or acknowledged or invited to collaborate or trusted or et cetera, right? Um, you have to have the trust of the staff, and so that the fact that I did spend quite some time teaching did help,
Right.
but I think knowing the struggles during those years was equally important, and
Mm-hmm.
then and knowing where I excelled or what are the things that, because you don't know this as you're moving through it, but there are strengths that everyone has, and sometimes you may lose them, right? And
Yep.
you may feel insecure about them, and you'll need
Mm-hmm.
a good administrator or a good friend or a colleague or department chair or somebody to remind you that this is something you're good at. Um, and so when I when I moved to and being an administrator, I understood that I was pretty good at my content, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to continue that. I was pretty good at motivating folks and getting them to see that this is gorgeous. Getting up in the morning and going to a building, going to work in a district, in a building where you can impact so much is a that's a beautiful way to get up, right? And so,
Absolutely.
but it's a heck of a responsibility as well. So you need to take certain things with you. And I was already someone that was resilient,
Mm-hmm.
um, growing up the way I did. I was also someone that learned to get through struggles,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, not only as a elite athlete, but I was a non-English speaker that became an English major and an English
Right.
teacher, and a good one. And so you think about those things, and those are things that you carry with you. So how do you grow some of those things um, in your staff, right?
Right.
I already grew up in San Francisco in the Mission, so my classrooms back in my day in junior high, they were diverse. We had several languages that could be spoken in the schoolyard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was like no big deal to me. We were all on this same journey where, to tie things together, um, maybe one day I can own a lake home or at least share one with somebody. Maybe I can become a leader, or maybe I can find something that I really love and give to folks, or um, it doesn't matter who I am or what others may think of me. I can achieve these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was an important piece of my growing up, is making it to where I to where I ended up,
Right.
because
That's
that in itself
a big
was
deal.
yeah, it was the those are the qualities that you need to succeed. So you take those things that you already know, and as a teacher, you begin day one. I think you and I had a conversation one time about one of the first things I asked teachers when we're struggling is what's your plan to what's your classroom morale plan? What's your plan for that, right? To maintain your morale, to monitor morale, to nudge morale back this way rather than that way. What's your plan, right? That's maintaining a certain culture in the classroom. And so, and it's different for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that morale is critical. So and that anytime there's a group, a team, your friends that you live with that have to make it through struggles, that morale is critical. So how do you as an administrator maintain that? Well, first you have to make sure that that's part of the plan.
Right.
And sometimes people forget that, right? They just move on with achievement only on their minds.
Well,
um,
I think we've become a very task focused society. So like if I could just check this off, if I have my to-do list and I check this off, everything will work fine. And I mean, I'll put myself out there to say that I was very comfortable with the task. You give me something like Scheduling, hate doing it, but it's a very task specific, detail oriented. You have to sit down and get it done. But
Mhm.
that's not that interpersonal work or the intrapersonal work that has to happen. It has to be something much more humanistic than just the task.
I agree. And you and I talked right before this podcast a little bit about something you're doing that folks, staff, leaders need to take care of on the inside first.
Right.
So on the outside looking in, as a good administrator, you're going around looking to improve everything. I mean, everywhere you move, everything you do, don't say, is meant to like um,
Nudge you forward.
get to lead, yeah, to lead you forward to towards achievement, towards the achievement that the kids could get, etc. But you'll bump into, for example, and you won't know this unless you actually really get to focused on relationships. You may bump into a teacher who's really struggling. Maybe life is going on outside of school, but inside of school, there's some struggles too. Maybe they're related, maybe they're not. I'll give you an example. I knew a teacher that taught a foods class that was really just struggling with the excitement of it all, and was no longer. And I thought it was interesting, in a conversation, and you pass by, you hold these conversations to get to know kids, like Dr. Leo Frummel did for me.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do that for every staff member, right? So you get to know, and then you realize, hey, well, have you ever, because they've got all these in this case, they were closing out the year, 2 months was left in the school year. There was all this cleaning up and refrigerators all over the place with all this food, etc. And she was really struggling with that because the years before that was a real struggle. And you could see that this person was kind of like really just going to have a lousy closing of the year. And I didn't want that to happen. I asked her, I said, do you ever watch Iron Chef? She said no. And I described Iron Chef. Holy cow. Next thing you know, she's got her kids with the secret ingredients and the things that they had too much of. And then she wrote these menus for staff, and she invited them to come in and assess the plating, the flavors, the service for each of these pods. And all of a sudden, the school year ended fantastic for her, right?
Right.
Because of some simple suggestion, right? But you wouldn't know that unless you're going around doing that. So you need to do that for individuals, right? Again,
Right.
like what was done for me as an English major, wondering what the heck am I going to do with this, right? I've got this great knowledge, and I love to read, but what am I going to do with it? And how am I going to make money, right? You need to do that for individuals, but more importantly, when it comes to administrators, they need to figure out a way to do that systemically, right? How do I do that for my entire building, my entire
Right.
staff, beginning with departments or groups or PLCs, or and then the district needs to do that and tie that in, because as much as I know that you could waste a lot of time when there are too many bricks and not enough mortar.
Yeah.
Everybody's
Yeah.
got something new to throw up, but none of them really tie together to really become efficient,
Well,
right?
no, I mean, so it's been my experience having been in a district that had, I think we at one point we counted 23 different initiatives. So they can tie together, but
Yeah.
23 is a lot. And
Mm.
when we talk about, I think it's always ironic that we talk about the need to focus on a skill for kids, yet
Yeah.
we focus on all of these things for teachers, and we want them to be, Jacks and Jills of all trades, and master of none, yet masterfully teach their content. And of course, I'm speaking specifically of the secondary level because that's where our experiences are, and it's
Yeah.
a little bit different at the elementary level. And I don't pretend to know what the dynamics are, but it seems like our system is speaking out of the both sides of its mouth. We want one thing for students, and yet we don't allow that same thing for teachers, even though we recognize that that's the condition that the students need. But don't the teachers need that same thing too?
Yeah, and what specifically are you referencing?
Well, I'm just referencing, like,
That
for
one
example,
thing.
the 23 initiatives. Like, you've got PLCs, you've got,
Yeah.
Marzano, you've got,
Oh yeah,
PBIS, you've got
I get you.
MTSS, all
Yeah,
of those things. They do all go together. But if you
yeah,
don't if you're only, excuse my language, doing any of them half-assed, then you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
doing any of them well. And
Right.
then that cohesion, that simplification, that overlap, that redundancy that we want our educators to be able to craft and do doesn't
Mhm.
happen because we've spread them too thin. Yet if they did
Absolutely.
that with their students, we would get on their case all day and all night.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I agree, and it's interesting because I too, and maybe it was the same district that you and I were at, where they put all the initiatives on the wall, and realized that we need to cross some of these out, right?
Right.
And some of them didn't even exist anymore. No one was really on that. It was just in the books, but it wasn't being done. So it was a pleasure to begin to cross some of those out and reduce the workload. But that was way back, and imagine today when after going through COVID and after
Oh,
going through the
absolutely.
gap getting wider and the stress and anxiety of health and mental health and trauma, etc. I mean, we know so much more now and act or could act as if we know so much more now. And we we do sometimes ask too much. And the answer really is, what are our real priorities? And
Right.
how do each of these impact the other? And let's do those, right? Instead of these kind of compartmentalized things that are on the
Well,
side.
not only that, I
Yeah,
think, like, the other thing that strikes me as in my experiences, you have upper level district administration, and mind you, I don't have anything like I want to be an upper level administrator, but you have folks who are making decisions about things that are happening in buildings that are not necessarily including the teachers into that conversation. So what might look good on paper in actuality is a little clunky and not necessarily well fitting. Having more, I mean, again, we want students to have voice and choice, but we don't allow teachers to have that same voice and choice. It's it's interesting.
yeah, yeah. And then and I luckily I've been in a few gigs that where we really wanted to know what teachers needed and wanted. But at the same time, as a leader, you've got to make some tough decisions and you've got to decide what they are, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of those things can be dealt with, um, by simple. You've got to address them, right? Part of culture, for example, and I know I'm trying to stay with culture because I know it's the topic that you
Right.
want to hang in there with. Well, one of the things in culture is just like when you're talking about kids. If there's something that they're doing that is a misbehavior, something that's inappropriate, you have to address it. I mean, you have to address that kind of misbehavior or something inappropriate because it's about teaching and learning, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing when you want to improve your culture or your climate in school. You've got to address those things. You've got to have expectations where, for example, when PE teachers I was at this building one time where the PE teachers, for some reason, went maybe when there was a sub mostly, but that too needs to be fixed. The kids would be allowed to go into the hallways earlier, because they
Yeah.
got dressed fast, and that has to be stopped, right? You can't have students going into the building and they're louder and in a sense interrupting the last 2 minutes, minute and a half,
Yep.
90 seconds, 30 seconds of classes. So you've got to stop those types of things. You've got to have people
Right.
show up on time. You've got to be able to teach at the same time, the little things like how do you handle subs and how are you going to react when a classroom is disrespectful to a sub, and how do you make sure that that's not going to happen? And it's not just about sub plans. There's a whole lot more to that when teachers are not going to be there for like, let's say, a professional development, and they prepare the class for the sub, and many great teachers do, right? They prepare that. Those tiny little things that seem tiny, they're huge, right? Bell to bell teaching, that's huge. You can't have kids
That's
leaking in
huge.
the classroom, right?
So
You've got to have a plan when they come in, right? Well, as soon as they come in, that bell rings. What's the very first thing? You can't be off over there having a conversation again or at your desk doing something else and 2 minutes go by, because you're trying to establish a standard of excellence, of achievement, of my time is valuable, and
your
teachers
time is
understand that.
valuable. Not just my
Yeah,
time, your time is valuable.
absolutely. And students know that you care about me. I know you care about me as my teacher if you respect your time in your classroom so that we can
Right,
get things done.
right.
Now I know that you really mean what you're saying. You're really authentic, right? And so there are all those things, but there are huge things that need to happen. I know in the past we've talked about vision. You've got to have that um, down, and especially today, because as you know, you've been in a great example is curriculum review, right? When you're buying
Mhm.
new textbooks or new materials, curriculum materials for an entire content area across a district, let's say every 7 years in most places, the first thing you look at is the mission and vision. And the question really is, if nothing's really changed much, then the mission and vision are usually the same. But if
Right.
something's really changed, you
It's
know,
like our culture.
yeah, like COVID just swept through. Kids have a larger gap now. Teachers are more stressed out and anxious. Maybe there are new cultural shifts and changes. Um, Politics has gone bananas, has now gone into school board meetings and into other places where it's really making educators feel
Under
even more
siege.
anxious and more
Right.
weight or under siege. That's a great term. Um, Maybe the vision needs to be tweaked
Yeah.
at this point, because we all have to be in agreement that these things are upon us, and as a unit, as a group, how what are we choose what's our stance, what are we
Yeah.
choosing?
So I want to follow up right there. I would like to ask you, as a person of color and as a person who has been on the forefront of leading this work, how do you get, say, a staff of 100 to to formulate that vision and mission in an authentic way that also leads us to having something tangible that takes us forward? How have you done that? That's, and I ask mostly out of curiosity because that's been a
Yeah.
sticking point for me, and I think mostly because it's kind of been like a girl interrupted kind of situation. I've not been able to see things to fruition, but
Mhm.
I know because of our work together that, for example, you took math teachers who were used to teaching upper level math and had them teach intro level math, which is astounding, impactful, is absolutely the right thing to do. And I could also hear and imagine that it was also hard and uncomfortable and not necessarily a change that was well received. So how do you build that vision and mission with folks who are not necessarily looking at you as their leader per
Mhm.
se? I'll say it that way.
That's a great question. Okay, first of all, let me respond to, it wasn't that uncomfortable for me, and and I think it's because I grew up the way I grew up. It's like, well,
Right.
no, we're part of the system too, right? Just because yo no hablo inglés como tú hablas inglés doesn't mean that I should be treated differently in certain areas. Obviously, I need more support in English and understanding how I can engage in those classes, right? But I'm not
Right.
any different otherwise, right? So I grew up that way. Yeah, I can get a lot darker in the summer than you, and that doesn't mean I'm different than and should receive a certain different type of treatment, or should be dismissed or appear more in special ed or ELL or in your discipline sheets or
Right.
or your attendance things. Those things are odd to me. They shouldn't be there. And I've moved that way. So to answer your question regarding what would I do and how have I done that in the past, you 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 do so by let me give you the example and then we could describe it. Okay.
Okay.
When I first got to for example, Iowa City West, one of the top, Newsweek public schools in America,
Yep. I
I
had
thought
three
I was
children
going
go
to,
through that school.
yeah, and I've had it one, and so and I'm going to have another one. So you know, I get there and I'm leaving a very active school that is in great shape. But my first 2 years in San Mateo Peninsula at Cappuccino, there was a lot of, I mean, it was very active discipline wise. I mean, that's all I did,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and I think in the past I shared with you that I didn't want to stay there and be pigeonholed as this vice principal. Okay, Mr. Pepin, he's great at with the students, and I was pretty good, but I didn't want to stay there and do that. I wanted to try curriculum and do those other things, which is why schools are there, right? Let me go to that side more,
Right.
and it would have been easy for me to stay, but I didn't. So I came to Iowa City West. Uh, I thought it would be, way less active, et cetera. But no, my first year was very, very difficult. It was very, very difficult. They had some of the same things that were going on. So what I know, and I noticed right away the first couple of weeks that the folks that are not in class when that second bell rings that you should be in class was disproportionately kids of color. They're still in the
Yep.
hallways, taking a
Yep.
sip of water, going to the bathroom, taking their time to class. And it's like, well, hold on a second, this can't be. And we shouldn't allow this, right? So
Right.
you begin to do certain things. I joined the DMC, the Johnson County Disproportionate Minority Contact Committee,
Yep.
to find out what happened with our kids in the community and what happened in school that got them in touch with law or the criminal justice system,
Yep.
which is something that you want to avoid if you can and not do that. And so I did that. I started a diversity group um, where I showed the the success, the achievement of students at my former school versus this school. Showed them where they were at a top 1,000 school. Showed the difference in achievement between Black and Brown students compared to the entire population, including Black and Brown students, because that's as far a gap as I wanted to show. And I sent out letters to all ninth grade families that were Black and Brown saying, hey, we're going to do this. And if your kid wants to join an organization that will try to place achievement at the top of the list and nurture the GPA, we'd love to have them attend this meeting. You're going to have to give them permission to leave their whatever period class. So we did that. 80
Right.
something students showed up, and we did that every year. That group won the Excellence in Education Award by the Iowa City Chamber of Commerce. But my point is, when teachers see an administrator working directly with the things that he or she believes really matter, and they see how it flows, then you go in and you talk to the math department and say, hey, I looked at the data, and in Intro to Algebra, in Algebra 1A and 1B, and in Algebra 1, here is a graph that depicts how many A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's there are. And notice that we have a lot of Black and Brown students at the bottom end of that. What can we do about this? Let's have a meeting, bring all the teachers that you think are necessary. The department chair thought, yeah, we should. And we met, and although there was some discomfort in that, it was awesome to see that in most cases, overwhelmingly, teachers want to help. Sometimes a teacher wants to help that really doesn't have quite the skill set or whatever it is at that moment, at that time, to help. They have to wait and maybe study some other things or kind of investigate themselves or whatever. But you can get teachers to do that, right? And so once you do those things, right, you start at the student level and you figure out where the Where are you as an assistant principal, right? Where can I assist? What are the areas that are the heaviest, the
Right.
toughest? And you do that. Then the staff sees, and then you involve them. And maybe you do both at the same time, because it's not like I wasn't doing anything with the
Right.
staff at that time, you know. But it makes it a lot easier when you yourself are involved with students and with the struggles that that particular school has. Okay. So, last example, I had a different school in the area of achievement during a meeting. This particular school had at the 8th, 7th grade level, you could join an advanced class, but the criteria was you had to be above the 85th percentile in the Iowa assessment and
Mm-hmm.
have an A or B in the previous content, right?
Right.
The same content.
Right.
And that was it. And that was it. And I just thought, this can't be, right? No wonder all those classes are missing students of color. And so you've got to set out to change that. And but you have to point it out as something that people understand is, yeah, that can't be right. I mean, what are we saying with that? And do we really believe that? Right.
Right.
And
Right.
once you have those discussions, you realize that you get faculty that want to help with that. They want to create new policies that would allow that class to be more diverse and still include all the kids that were going to be there to begin with anyway. And if that meant you had to grow your achievement program, your advanced program, wow, what's wrong with that, right? And
Right.
so,
Like,
and so, so, so you do those, you know, those are the things systemically, as you point out, how do you change culture? Those are the things that have to happen. Um, and so, and those are like some pretty concrete examples, but you also have to be attentive to, like that last example, things that are in place, that have been in place for years,
yes,
that need to go.
the tradition.
Yeah, that need to go. And
Yeah.
those sometimes could be difficult, but you have to line up enough folks, enough critical mass, um, to get that to flip, you know, and change. Uh, and there's got to be reasons why, and everyone's got to be able to say, yeah. And so those are some examples of how you can begin to flip culture with some concrete things that people can do, or that I've done in the past. I don't know if, you know, many schools, I hope, don't have that same issue. For example, with advanced classes, right?
Unfortunately, I can testify, since I have a friend who worked for the equal opportunity schools, and that whole program is supposed to get more kids of color into AP classes, and she and I are good friends. And it is a problem everywhere. In most places, unfortunately, it's still a pervasive issue. But before we conclude, I
Yeah,
have this burning desire to ask you, because it occurs to me one of the things that kind of makes us simpatico is our approach to who we are as people moving in the world. And I think for you that it works well. For me, it's still something I'm learning from. And it's that notion that you are a person first. Of course, you're a Hispanic male, you are a non-native English speaker, you were born in Caribbean, you identify as Puerto Rican. Those things matter, but those things don't determine who and what you are. And I think in today's DEI work, when you have this politicization of keep CRT out of our schools, you have this tension of we need to recognize difference, but not necessarily only recognize difference. And it occurs to me that you and I both work and operate in a mindset that we are who we are, regardless of what skin we come in or what package that is. But that's not necessarily how others perceive us. So how do you work within, like, how does that land for you, and how do you How do you think about that tension?
I've got to be honest. I think you try not to travel with that, right? I'll give this as part of my response. I would never hesitate or stutter or be reluctant about, hey, we at our building, we cherish, understand, and respect diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. Now, granted, that doesn't always happen, right? You get the kid that is beyond certain supports that you might be able to
Mhm,
provide,
mhm.
um, and I get that, and those are hard, but it does happen. I would
Absolutely,
never
especially
feel
at the
that way,
secondary level.
right? But I would never feel like I need to defend that. In fact, it wasn't until and your audience doesn't know that I'm blind, and I've been blind since I gave up driving um, in 2000. So everything I've accomplished as an administrator, especially a couple of years of teaching, has been as a blind person, right? So there's that component as well, which we haven't, and we don't need to, but you overcome those things.
Right.
But one of the things is that you have when I moved through the schools, I really didn't pay attention a whole lot to all the political landscape and hoopla
Mhm.
and fervor and passion and all that. There was the right way to do it, and I knew that I had a group of people that knew that way. I felt I knew that way. I was confident in that way, and that's how we were going to march. And that's just the way it is. When you leave the building and you start hearing about how even diversity in some mouths seems like a bad word, which is just absurd, right? You can begin to question. And so, and not me, I don't question it, but I can feel that it begins to teeter some folks, right? Some
Mhm.
folks that normally would have said diversity with confidence are like, diversity, like we're trying to figure out what audience I'm with, right? Are these people going to throw tomatoes at me because I mentioned the D word? That happens.
Mhm.
You can't have that happen, right? And so when
Right.
you say you just move, you've got to be ironclad on what you believe as an educator, whether it's a teacher or whether it's an administrator. You've got to be ironclad on the beliefs you have. So you are not nudged off in crazy tandems like arguing about how diversity is awful. That's not even a question.
Right.
Um, when I went out looking for an engineering program for the Iowa City Community School Districts, and they sent me with the principal for Iowa City High, we purposely came back with one that boasted that it's going to attract brown and black students and women into the engineering field. And it was super important because we needed diverse thinkers when solving problems instead
Yep.
of folks that thought, pretty much the same way. Not that
Yep.
everybody thinks the same way anyway, you know. But we did want as many varied minds looking at this problem as we could find because we would have a better chance of solving it in a creative way, right?
Right.
At the intersection of diversity is great creativity, one person once said, and I thought, that's a great saying. So that shouldn't be a bad thing. So my point is this: you got to move with confidence. You, in order to move with confidence, you got to have a belief that is ironclad, and you need to move and navigate that way. And you need to model for those that don't have that security so that they too can see, you know, he moves without doubting himself when he is saying, hey, I want to write a letter to all my brown and black students' parents coming into the ninth grade because we're going to do something about it.
Right.
Today, if you have that thought, someone's going to say, you're segregating them. You are putting them all. Why are you doing that? And I mean, you're going to get challenged from both
Actually,
sides.
not even today. I actually did that in my building. I proposed that to my
Uh-huh.
principal and got shot down for that very reason.
Yeah, and I could see that. So, what makes it work in one place and get an award?
Right.
Uh, and not in another, right? Those types of things are super important to try to pinpoint and figure out, because there's a lot of negative talk out there. And I don't blame teachers today for being stressed out and anxious. I mean, things are a little different than they were right before COVID, a little wicked. And so the best that they can do is to really understand that they're doing great. They're in a great profession, and they're going to continue to do their best in that profession. And they need to be absolutely firm on their belief in the importance of education and learning. And the education and learning is more than just that, the just a simple achievement that can be proved through, assessment data, right? It's much more than that. And so we know this. So I mean, I hope that helps a little bit your question.
It does. It does and it doesn't. But I think it's a really well, no. I think it's a really good. I like the notion of leaving or ending on a good note, because I am as convinced and as passionate about the work that teachers are doing as you are. And I believe that in this landscape at this moment, a lot of teachers do feel under siege. A lot of teachers do feel unsupported. A lot of teachers do feel spread thin. And I want to encourage them to continue on that pathway of reaching and teaching their kids, because their kids are tomorrow's future, and we don't get better if we just get lost in all of the negativity.
Good ending. I believe that. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, on that note, this has been another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions. I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg. Thank you, Mr. Francisco Pepin, for joining me in this conversation today. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Feel free to like, comment, and share this episode, and we will see you again next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Valerie Nyberg.